beneficial effect to that. Certainly.
So two things. One is that by creating the mobility division that the department is creating, which was called Strategic and Transportation Planning, which Francie oversees, there is a bringing together of the different ideas around how we get around parking policies as well as complete streets and a variety of other things. So that's the idea around the mobility division, is to bring these things together. But in addition to that, the traffic engineer right now, one of the projects that we're looking at is very specifically around 2nd and 4th, which is really the circle where all the parking structures are, and looking at the circulation and and really trying to think is, I don't want to say radically, but I know that for some folks in the downtown it is somewhat radical in terms of some of the ideas that we might consider, including potentially one-way streets just in that one circular area, and what are the pros and cons to that. Prohibiting the left turns on a more permanent basis to help keep traffic flowing. Working with our police department and what they're experiencing on 2nd, and how do we address those things. So we are trying to integrate that into the overall design and how everything flows as it relates even to the structures. The other idea that's been floated is installing more automated signaling systems for the pedestrians as well as for the vehicles around the structures. So in some of the structures, like an 8, where there's a very large entrance that signaling could potentially help in terms of controlling pedestrian traffic as there are the conflicts and interactions between the pedestrians and the vehicles coming in to help keep everything flowing. So to answer your question, yes, we are considering those, and I think that looking at ideas and trying to consider things that maybe maybe have not been popular in the past, but trying to look at, is it time? Do we need to really sort of push that, like with the 90 minutes? Do we need to start really pushing those things, even if there is some public opposition in some areas?
If I can also add, just sort of conceptually within the DCP framework, one of the preliminary analyses that were done in terms of looking at circulation downtown was really looking precisely at that was street capacity and also anticipated pedestrian flows, and how much pedestrian flows, and really relative to one of the largest city-owned sites downtown, the 4th, 5th, and Arizona site, and taking a look at if given what we know about how circulation works in 4th Street being where a number of public parking structures are located, really high occupancy. If we were to put parking at that particular site, how many spaces could it accommodate before we sort of reach some capacity? And you see in the plan it actually speaks to about 900 spaces. Much of the strategy in the DCP with respect to where parking is located really had to do with addressing this idea of in our congested core, is that really where we want to start to direct people to park? And so you see in the DCP the strategy to locate parking really more on the periphery and to direct vehicles to the periphery, and that's sort of ties in with the rates of the civic structures, the ability to sort of spread this around and really take advantage of this great sort of squared street network system that we have, and the ability to try and move and manipulate the way that people circulate around the downtown.
Okay, so if I can just add one more thing, and we're trying to further that peripheral strategy with the evening and weekend rates at the Civic, with the thought being that since it's so underutilized during those periods, that with low rates, hopefully we can drive people to that location and the congested streets of 2nd and 4th and the cross streets as well.
Commissioner Kennedy, and then
I can be really brief. I just want to say I echo everything that Commissioner Perry said. All the comments of the Commission so far are excellent, and I agree. I'm in favor of minor modifications to the parking operations. I agree with aligning Civic Center rates with the downtown rates, but I hope that you'll explore devising an appropriate incremental graduated rate increase and work with the school district, get their participation for their employees. Don't increase the 30 minutes to 90 minutes at the Civic. I think the city really needs to know the driving patterns of employees that for trips that originate outside of Santa Monica, and find a way to do that research. And I have a couple of other comments that I want to make, but I just want to divert for a second. Perhaps Mr. Merton has some more information about this, but that comment is specifically from some feedback I've been getting from a community meeting that happened last night that maybe you can elaborate on, but I think there was a lot of community concern about the lack of data on trips that originate, employee trips that originated outside of Santa Monica for TDM purposes. Is that, am I getting the gist of that correct?
I'm not sure. I don't really remember that discussion or that issue coming up last night. You're talking about the Wilmot meeting, or?
Yeah, I think it was a Wilmot meeting. I could have the meeting wrong, but I can get more information about it. But
Right.
you were explaining. Is my understanding that I think it was that you were at the meeting explaining that you didn't have the data on trips, employee trips that originated outside of the city regarding for TDM purposes. And
Is
in
it
one
sort of
instance.
Trips that into Santa Monica in general?
Actually, I don't have all of
Oh.
the. That's why I was hoping you could elaborate on it, because
Yeah.
I didn't have
we
all
were
of the
both at the
information.
meeting. I don't remember
Yeah.
that question, that
Okay.
specific question coming up. There was a lot of discussion about, traffic and as there always is in parking and density, but
Right.
I don't remember that particular
All
question.
right, well, I'll get more
Yeah,
information.
Maybe get
and-
more.
let us know
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
details, and we'll
Yeah.
definitely look into
Sure,
it.
because
for
it
you.
sounded like it was a big community concern, but I found out about it late today, so. I do think the city should look at doing something to benefit residents to access the downtown, whether it's resident discounts, whatever it is. I guess all of this, works together like a puzzle piece, so I think you could explore congestion pricing, including the foreseeable consequences, but the benefits too. And let's see, based on feedback that we got from DTSM, I would just say definitely conduct a comprehensive update to this 2012 study, and comprehensive is the key word, as soon as possible. Thanks.
I have a couple of questions to ask before I move to comments. So I noted somewhere in here that there were two facilities in the downtown that staff who worked for retailers seemed to frequent a lot with. Do you know which were those two?
Are you talking about?
I guess so. You suggested that of all the parking structures, there were two that most of the people who worked in retail went to. Which were they?
Well, I don't know if they're necessarily working in retail, but a lot of our key card
Whatever they
holders
were working in.
do parking structures 1 and 3. The ones on 4th Street next to Wilshire and Arizona, respectively.
Yeah. So is it your suggestion that you would move them from 1 and 3 to the Civic Centre and 6?
6 is probably more likely, just because we have
Okay, better question. Where are you thinking of moving them to?
parking structure 6. That's where we find that we have a lot of capacity.
Because it's underutilised and it's never
Correct.
been full,
Yes.
or 25 minutes one day. So your suggestion is you move them from the congested kind of over full areas to this underused place around the town.
Yeah, and that would also kind of address what Commissioner Fonda Bernardi was saying, because by increasing the availability in 1 and 3, that people who are coming to downtown Santa Monica for the first time, or they're not very familiar with our network of garages, if they find parking structure 1 or 3 and it's not full, they can just pull right in and get off the street network and eliminate a longer trip.
It is an interesting irony, isn't it, that the discounted price that the businesses are offering to the people who work for them with these monthly cards is filling up the parking and therefore making it difficult for their customers to come. When you discuss that with them, how did they respond to that suggestion?
They
Or did you not point that out?
I didn't point that out exactly.
That's probably wise, I'm sure.
The Downtown Santa Monica Inc. board was in favor of minor increases, but they we're not in favor of aligning it with the policies in the Bergamot area plan or the other DAs where the council had required a 20 times the daily rate.
So Century City now charges from the moment you drive in for parking across the board. Does that factor in? I mean, you said that you want to keep it competitive with other places, but here's a private operator who just continues to keep growing. Westfield seems to get larger and larger.
My supervisor is pointing out that the staff, we don't want to keep it competitive. It is something that the Downtown Santa Monica Inc. board.
But the
wants
basic thrust of it remains that here is a major private sector operator, and Century City keeps expanding. They don't seem to have a problem with people coming to their facility and paying full price right from the outset.
Right. I mean, yes, I agree with your premise. I don't know, the details of their parking occupancy inside and out, but yes, I mean, in evaluating what we charge, we do look at other locations. We did look at other downtown areas, and also we looked at some mall type areas, and we also looked at other neighborhoods that along the metro network that have rail stations. The one thing that we keep coming back to is we're not like any of those other places entirely, because we have quite a mix, and we also have the beach, which is really a huge draw, internationally, as has been pointed out. So we do look at what other locations are doing, but it's hard for us to say that's exactly what we should do, given how it's not exactly apples to apples.
So Mr. Upton came and suggested that the school and the school district were a special case that needed special pricing to take into account their unique problems. The city has quite a number of employees. What do the city employees pay for parking over in that structure? Because that must be one of the major causes of filling that up.
Yeah, city employees are provided with free parking.
Really? So we don't have a TDM program in place for the city either, do we?
We do, actually. The city offers incentives to those that carpool, walk, bike. The city does make transit passes available to those employees that
And yet
that
it's
want
not
them.
powerful enough to stop people driving and filling up those parking spaces. Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I just would say that the issue of charging employees for parking is something that we are actively talking about and working on. There are employee contracts that come into
I'm
place.
sure it's the same union issue that
absolutely.
Mr. Upton is
So
referring to.
it's something that we are focused on now, and we are working towards a solution.
But as the two biggest employers in the city and the school district, you do have a disproportionate impact on the number of spaces available, and given the number of people who come, that then distorts all the pricing and creates the traffic issues.
Sure. We completely agree with you. I think that as with many of the issues related to whether it's a 90-minute free or whether retail locations, how we look at our pricing, we're not in sort of in a private business, so we have to kind of balance all of the different demands and all of the different sort of takes on how we're presenting our policy questions, and so, or even our recommendations. And so that's what makes the challenge. With regards to the employee parking, certainly we agree with you. We believe that employees, should pay for parking. We also think that the TDM program should be more heavily funded. I think that those are things that we are working towards. And of course, with the union contracts, there's meet and confer issues that we have to go through. Our Human Resources Department is currently very actively involved in that right now, and they're the ones who actually take the lead on the meet and confer component of it. But Francie's group has been very involved in reviewing and creating the proposals for how would we develop a TDM program that would be more robust than the one that we have today, because the one that we have today is not well funded. And so these are things that we are very sensitive to, we completely agree with, and we are working towards.
Okay, so in thinking about this, I'm not really sure why it's one thing or the other. So we do need some predictability. People who are driving here on a regular basis and that have got these cards at whatever we price them do want to know where they're going to park, whether it's number 6 or number 3 or the Civic. But the rest of the world has moved to dynamic pricing, which is the same thing that Uber has and everyone has, to push people around a city and get them to park in different places. And not only that, I think the value of parking in Santa Monica is a little different when it's raining in February to the week before Christmas. So the ability of us to charge different prices and to use technology must certainly be a key factor in controlling what people are doing on the roads. That's what parking is. It enables people to drive. And if there's one thing that our city people, the residents are concerned about, is the amount of traffic or congestion in the downtown. On at least 2 previous occasions, I've asked the question whether it's possible, if the rates of parking go up in the downtown, we could create a stored value card or some sort of resident option so that people would have, they could use it on the Breeze bike share, or they could use it on the metro, or they could use it for some parking in the downtown. Was that part of your thinking?
Not at this point. I don't know if
Did it enter any consideration at all?
Yeah,
No, not so much.
Well, so again, for this particular discussion, we're not attempting to create new policy. We're saving new policy for the larger discussion, because it will be a very difficult discussion that we have in the larger proposals that we eventually will probably make. In terms of offering discounts to residents, I think that was your question, right? In terms of offering some type of...
It was more than that. It was a way of giving something back to the residents based on the fact that prices would go up, and that you could offer them a way to get into the downtown, whether it was some sort of parking availability, whether it was put the money into the Breeze bike share or call an Uber or whatever it is. It's just a wider concept. People repeatedly tell you they don't go downtown for whatever reason. No,
well, I think that certainly I think there's some disagreement as to whether or not residents visit the downtown. I think that our surveys show that residents do visit the downtown. So whether they drive there or not, I don't recall in the surveys.
I think that's a
whether or not
different
they
issue you're talking to now. So I think the answer to my question is no, you didn't consider it.
Again, like I said, in this particular subject, we were not considering new policies. We were only considering very specific, targeted operational questions, so that way we could address some things that we thought were more immediate.
But respectfully,
concern.
you make new policy every time you change the pricing, and you are talking about putting the Civic into it in a different way. Mr. Upton's obviously concerned that we're raising the price of the Civic to the extent that we're disempowering some of his staff, and there'll be a cost. I think across the board, that's one of the issues.
Right, but again, the point I'm trying to make is that we tried to keep this as narrow and as focused as we possibly could, so that we only wanted to address the things that we felt were the most pertinent, the most important. Certainly, we are absolutely open to taking in. We will make note of what the recommendations are in terms of what we should be looking at, and we will most certainly consider those. Even if staff doesn't agree, at the end of all of this process, staff doesn't agree with a particular recommendation that the Planning Commission might put forward or that DTSM might put forward, we would still include that. Certainly, the staff reports that I have put forward before council, I've always included opposing opinions as to what those recommendations are. That's been the style that I have used when I go to council, not just what staff's recommendation is, because I think that ultimately it's going to be council's decision, and so council should be able to weigh all the different points of view and different opinions that folks have. So certainly we're not opposed to considering anything that would make sense. Our recommendations may be slightly different again than your recommendations might be, but we would certainly include those in any report that we would present to council. So with regards to the dynamic pricing that you mentioned, the technology that we have in place today does not allow for dynamic pricing. So when that equipment was purchased a couple of years ago, that was before Jason and I were involved, that particular technology does not allow for dynamic pricing. We don't have the technology in place and able to do that. Whether or not we think that dynamic pricing at that level where the prices change on an hourly basis or on a daily basis, we don't know whether that's a good thing. I couldn't sit here and tell you whether I think that's a good thing or not, whether or not that actually accomplishes what it would propose to accomplish, and then would it benefit enough for the cost in terms of losing at least some level of predictability. Dynamic pricing on a 6-month basis, is something I think that we think that probably we would be more comfortable with. But again, it's something that we would be willing to consider. It would require the purchasing of new technology in order to accomplish that, which is something that over the next 3 to 5 years, one of the things that we're working on now is putting together a strategic plan for our technologies, so that way technology changes so rapidly. We want to be in 3 to 5 years from now, since most of the contracts we have will begin to expire about that time. So we need to start looking forward to that. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Partly. I'll go to Commissioner Parry and then Commissioner Kennedy.
So I wanted to ask a question that's basically to help my thinking going forward. When we're talking about the 90-minute free period in the downtown structures, I'm torn about it, because we've heard that that pricing can be a very powerful tool in changing the mode of transportation, and yet we want the downtown to be very accessible to Santa Monica residents. And that gets me thinking, like, well, is the pricing the tool for reducing trips in our case, or is pricing a tool for guiding what type of user parks where in the downtown? And that leads me to the question, when we're thinking about the 85% utilization goal, what net effect would that have on trips into, and I know that parking and trips, it's not a one-to-one thing. It depends who's making the trips and how often. But do we have a sense of what that would mean in terms of the total number of people parking in the downtown if we were to achieve that 85% occupancy rate over time?
So I think the study that the baseline study that's going to be embarking soon, one of the questions is to understand how the 90 minutes free impacted the respondents' decision to drive that day. And in fact, I think one of the questions might even be, are you even aware of the 90 minutes free? Because I'm sure there's some number of people, and we don't know exactly how many, that they're coming to Santa Monica, they're driving to Santa Monica, they don't know what the parking's going to cost. It is what it is, and they just want to be here. So we don't really know exactly how that factors in. I'm thinking that probably it's not as big a factor as some people might think it is, because this is such a happening place that people want to be, that they're willing to come here and pay to park. And if that 90 minutes saves them $1, I don't know how big of an impact that really would be.
Well, maybe I didn't articulate it clearly, or maybe I don't understand how your response connects to it. If we were to achieve this goal of 85% occupancy, would that mean that there would be fewer cars parking in the downtown than are today? Would it be more? Would it be no change?
The theory is that there would be fewer cars, and there would be a little bit more availability for people who do show up, right? Because there's fewer cars, so that's what creates the additional availability. So that's the theory, is that's what it does. So it even goes even further in that the idea being that if the on-street parking is a little bit more expensive than the off-street parking, then folks who are coming for a very short period of time are going to be more willing to pay the higher price for the shorter period of time, because they're coming in for just a few, an hour or so. So that amount that they might pay, that $1.50 they might pay, or $2 they might pay for that 1 hour for the convenience, they might be willing to do. But if they know they're going to be here for a few hours, they're going to choose the cheaper option, which is in the structure, and so that gets them, off the street. So again, that's where we believe that the pricing isn't just something that happens on its own. It's relational to everything else, from how much it costs to take a bus to how much it costs, to utilize other options such as Uber or whatever you're going to do. And again, when we're talking about congestion, vehicle for hires, whether it's an Uber or even a taxi cab, at least from my perspective, those are still technically single occupancy vehicles if it's one person in the car with the driver. So one of the things that we do see even in our own downtown is that because of the increase in the number of Uber drivers, and that is their philosophy, is that that you need a lot of those drivers out there to get the speed at which you can get one of those vehicles. That adds to congestion. Those vehicles do add to congestion, as opposed to taxis, which are much more limited, which means that they can't respond as quickly. So there's a whole lot of things that impact, how many cars are on the street at any given time and how many parking spaces are taken, because if somebody does choose to take an Uber, then that does, to some degree, technically free up a parking space, right? People aren't needing to use that parking space, but they do need to have loading and unloading zones. So, as you know, we're somewhat in a dynamic period right now where there's lots of things that are changing, and so we're needing to adjust, whether within our downtown, whether that's the train or whether that's, the proliferation of TNCs. There are changes, and then also just the makeup of our downtown in terms of the development that's taking place. All of these things are coming together and converging, and so we're needing to respond to that. So I don't know that there's a simple answer to it. And then again, when you look at all of the different types of users that we have who utilize our parking structures, pricing is also not an easy question, because when you set up a pricing for one scenario, because you're trying to accommodate one group, you then can potentially negatively impact another group. And so for us here, it is a delicate balance. It's not as simple as some other cities where they don't have as many users as we do, or even like an airport, which is a much simpler situation in terms of how they set their pricing.
Okay. So, understanding the complexity of it all, I know that going into later discussions of this, I'm going to be thinking of this as the key controller of how many cars are coming down. Ultimately, will be the combination of supply and the pricing strategy. And I'm hoping that because, providing supply of parking, not in and of itself, but can lead to the generation of trips, and can crowd out other uses and reduce the amount of flexibility of what uses can go in place. That our approach in the DCP should be to really minimize the expansion of the supply downtown, and use, as has been discussed, the pricing and the wayfinding and the information exchange in order to achieve better outcomes and make the existing parking work better, and potentially even take some existing parking uses offline. Parking structure number one in particular, creating other opportunities for utilizing that land. And I want to underscore a point that Commissioner Anderson made about phasing in our efforts, and it sounds like that's kind of built into how you're approaching this anyway. There's multiple steps in this process, but really looking at it with the expectation that it's going to take, even when the trains start rolling, it's going to take time for people to adjust their behaviors, for it to become an increasingly big factor in hiring decisions and decisions on where to live. and really try to set people up with the expectation that on down the line, they may need to have to factor in higher costs of parking into their daily business in the downtown.
Okay, Commissioners, I think Commissioner Parry's led us to final comments. So if anyone has some final comments, now's the moment. Commissioner Kennedy, please.
Well, my comments earlier were my final comments, and I do have another comment
Excellent.
to make, but I'm
Excellent
going to
comments
make
they were
it
too.
during future commission agenda items.
Commissioner Fonda Bernardi.
I'm just glad to hear the 90 minutes will come back to us.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Parry made some really good points. Concerned me to hear you talking about Uber. Uber replaces a single trip in a single car with multiple single trips. If nothing else, it removes maybe 7 or 8 trips off. So the pricing of parking has a lot to do with the number of cars in the downtown and whether people are taking their own car or riding a bike or catching an Uber or a taxi or a metro or something. And we are at the beginning, I hope, of significant change away from always relying on the car to a whole range of other issues. And so that's been the thrust of my comments about dynamic pricing or changing the pricing around the city, moving where people park, looking at issuing residents some sort of a stored value card so that you can enable the pricing to go up and eradicate these free pricing things which just encourage people to come and use their car as opposed to other ways of doing it. In terms of this paper, I think I'm in agreement with the prices. I think the affordable price shouldn't go up. I think people who are living in affordable housing have particular difficulties and need that car, and generally only have a car to a household. So that can be a significant imposition. In terms of the Civic, in doing the numbers, I don't think it's such a big rise right up until about 210 minutes. When you look at the comparison between current and suggested, certainly there's the cap that you've got at 5 minutes changes when it goes to 14, but that's the discouraging thing. I certainly razzled, Mr. Upton there, but he does have a point at the moment until they sort out their industrial arrangements and where they're going to put some of these cars. But if you're pricing it higher, they also need to be given some encouragement to shift their staff to greater TDM, just as the city needs to do that. So I do think it's a complex issue. I'm going to look with considerable interest to your policy paper that you're bringing. Did you say within the next year?
What are we, April? So
We're
probably
gonna wait a
closer
year.
to
And
the
Commissioner,
winter of next year.
the winter. Oh. Commissioner Parry just indicates that the monthlies do jump significantly higher, and maybe that's a two-step thing to move from 60 to 160. But once you put these prices into play, we will notice significant changes to the way people use the city, and that's what we're looking to do, I think. Are there any other comments? You paper. Thank you so much. And that finishes our study session. Future Commission agenda items.
Well, I'll just
Commissioner
clarify, I was going to talk about the future parking policy discussion, but I actually missed when you said that you were going to already bring that back. So I was going to propose it because I could, whether it's dynamic or congestion pricing being a policy, the issue of using technology. I mean, there's so many things that could be a policy. And the staff report tonight on the item we just finished talked about providing feedback for potential modifications, and then you would go forward with administrative recommendations to the council. But the policy and the administrative or programmatic things go hand in hand. So I am very much looking forward to that policy discussion and hope you can bring forward whatever you
So
can.
Commissioner Kennedy is hungry for more parking discussion.
So I think what might make sense is instead of just bringing back a big giant package, what might make sense is for us to come back over the next 12 months to get some smaller bites of items and things, ideas and stuff, so that way we can have these ongoing conversations as opposed to just bringing one big package sort of just before we come to council.
So when the zoning update got underway, there were a series of position papers that I thought was pretty useful in teasing out people's ideas and seeing what absolutely wouldn't work, I think. We learnt that very early on in the parking area, particularly in the residential areas.
Yeah.
When the people with the pitchforks were here that night. So
That might work.
Thank
That
you.
might be a
It
good
certainly
way to,
worked.
yeah, that might be
Commissioner
a way to
Parry?
go for.
Related to the zoning modifications, and I guess it's also loose modifications. When council approved the use changes, there was some talk about examining those surface parking lots that are currently zoned R2, like for example north of Wilshire. And there was some discussion about looking at whether really R2, those development standards made sense for those surface parking lots. And if that's not already in the works on staff's end, that I wanted to request that be a part of our policy discussions with the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, it certainly is something that we've been directed to take a look at, along with, as you know, a lot of other things when the zoning ordinance was adopted, including like the PICO neighborhood plan. So, you know, it's really just a matter of capacity, you know, how soon we can get to those things. But what you're describing is certainly something that we will take a look at. And I'm not sure if it will come back with the zoning ordinance policy cleanup that we've talked about, but it's something that we'll bring back to you as soon as we can devote appropriate staff attention to it.
Well put. I'm on the commission for another 4 years, maybe. Do you think it will come back in that time? Any other commissioners with thoughts? All right. Thank you. Then we're adjourned for the evening. Thank you. Well, actually, I may not be on the commission for another 4 years.